Yeah.
Thanks. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Native Connections Best Practices and Tools. Today we'll be covering part 2, Tuning into the Community's Readiness for Change. My name is BC Echohawk and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Native Connections team and contracting officer representatives Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We do want to hear from you, so please don't hesitate to use the chat box for questions or comments throughout the session. Right now, I'm going to hand it over to Sharon Eagleman, one of our grantee technical assistants, to open us up in a good way. Sharon?
Thank you, BC. So my name is Sharon Eagleman, and I'm an enrolled member of the Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Sioux Tribes of Montana. And I'm also Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians from Michigan. And thank you for asking me to open us in a good way. I'd like us to take a minute and just thank God, Creator, for giving us another day and for giving our families and our friends and our communities another day. And let us always be thankful for our health and our ability to take care of each other. And also thankful for our health and all the help that we receive so we can help other people in our communities. And let us always be thankful for where we are right now, for everything exactly as it is right now. And I just ask that God guide us in all of the work that we do, and so that we can do what we were meant to do in helping others. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. Today we have 3 presenters. My name is Deborah Radler. I'm a grantee technical assistant. I live in Spokane, Washington. I grew up from North Central Montana, and I'd like to pass this over to Sarah.
Thank you, Deborah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Pearson, and I have been with the Native Connections work since cohort 1. So a lot of you that have been here a long time, I've seen you around. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Julie White Pigeon. Julie.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I'm really glad to be here. My name is Julie White Pigeon. I'm from Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and I'm a member of the Saginaw Chippewa tribe of Michigan. And I've been a GTA for a little while, and I really enjoy working with our grantees. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you. So thank you, and I'll pass this on to Deborah, who will take us into our next part.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about our learning objectives. You know, this is a 4-part webinar series, and our first webinar we had a few weeks ago, we really focused on really looking at managing community partnerships and collaborative events. And we looked at that through the community systems analysis template. And that's really to help you really assess your community strengths. You know, and as you've moved through that process, you know, you're moving into, you know, what we're talking about today, you know, tuning into your community's readiness to change. And so in this webinar today, we wanted to provide an overview for you on the CRM process. And again, this is going to be an overview to really look at, you know, what is the community readiness process? What are the dimensions of readiness and the stages, and how do you move forward into developing those into activities? So that's going to be the focus for today. You know, on our part 3, that's where we're going to look at, you know, what we're calling a roadmap for success. How do you take the information from part 1 and part 2, you know, the CSA, the CRM, and, you know, move those into developing your strategic action plan? And then our last webinar, which will be in January, is going to be staying on the path, you know, program implementation, you know, outcome data, you know, and how do you modify your strategic action plan as you move through the years. So that's, you know, what our learning objectives are for these 4 webinars. So we're really glad you're with us today. Next slide. And again, you know, on today's webinar, we are looking at community readiness, and we're going to be providing a really good overview of what this is. So let's get ready to go. Okay, next slide, please. And I'm going to turn this over to Julie at this time.
Thank you very much, Deborah. You know, I really like this graphic, and it's what it looks like to me is like the medicine wheel, which we use in our communities. It has got the 4 segments, 4 directions, but this is the Native Connections approach. So it's an indigenous adaptation of the public health model and the strategic prevention framework. So it's developed specifically for our American Indian, Alaska Native communities in their efforts to address substance abuse and suicide in their communities. So the NC approach for short, it was produced by the Native Connections team in coordination with Native communities and SAMHSA and the GPOs, government project officers. So as you can see, the NC approach is circular and not linear. You know, as Native people, we tend to have a circular thought process. And in this graph, we can see those 4 directions, those 4 sections. So when we start looking at the Native Connections approach, we begin on the right side. There's a little arrow there that says start. This yellow section is the community system analysis, which we did cover in the recent webinar. We call it CSA, and the CSA is used to assess the community's strengths and protective factors. And also it has the purpose to connect potential partners that are needed to meet the grant objectives. The CSA will also track the strategic action plan activities over the life of the grant. Then we move on to the red section, which is this webinar, which covers the community readiness model. And it's a very useful tool because we're identifying the community's readiness for change. And this we call a CRM. It also gives approaches to use that match the community's level of readiness for change. And then we move to the next section, which is the black section. And this black section is the strategic action plan, the SAP. And the SAP is aligned with the CRM. The SAP is what helps you make your vision for change a reality and maps the way to where you want your community to go. You'll find that the SAP is a living document, meaning that it'll change as your community changes or doesn't change. And finally, we have in the white section, the implementation of the strategic action plan or ISAP. In this final stage, the focus is on collecting outcome data and finding ways to sustain the positive community changes that were created by the grant, identifying how and what to measure, how you report the outcomes, and how the strategies you are using impacts the community. In other words, did the activities help move toward the goal? Does it matter to our mission? And was it worth the effort? It's also important that leadership, the community, and the partnering agencies understand the plan and receive updates. So this will help with plan implementation and sustainability, which is always important to keep in mind. Okay. So, as we just discussed the Native Connections approach, I want to move to the next slide. And here's our first polling question. What I'd like to do is to ask you to use your chat box and share in the chat box. The first question, are you a new or returning grantee? And then which cohort are you a part of? So if you would take a moment and put it in the chat so that we can share and see who's here and where we're at. Looks like we've got some good folks here. All right. Looks like Kimberly Ferris is telling us that she's a returning grantee and she's cohort 8. Maybe you can tell us your program too. That would be really helpful. The program name, Aaron Casham, Seminole Tribe of Florida, returning grantee, cohort 5. And then we've got a new grantee, cohort 8, Steve Hedrick, the Urban Indians of Nevada. Oh, Kimberly's letting us know she's the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic. And that was cohort 8, returning grantee, so that you must have had a previous grant. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else want to share in the chat? Tell us your program, if you're a new or returning grantee, and which cohort you are a part of. And we have Mary Lisa Huntington. She's cohort 7, returning. And what program are you with, Mary Lisa? I'm saying hi to BC. All right.
So Julie, do we have a lot of returning?
It looks like she is with the Reconnecting Youth, Mary Lisa. Oh, and Annie Williams with Waswagening, Wisconsin Native Connections Prevention Program. Hey, Annie, that's one of my grantees with the Lac du Flambeau tribe. Mary Lisa says she's at the Fairbanks Native Association in Fairbanks, Alaska. And Annie says bonjour, which is our traditional greeting.
I think Ani was at our recent RSV just recently, this past week.
Yes, yes, been busy and active. Okay. Anybody else like to share? Robert Kozina, Howarack Incorporated, Nome, Alaska. And are you which cohort are you, Robert? And are you returning or new?
Okay.
It's good to see everyone. Good to see everyone here, and I'm glad that you've joined us. I think that we'll, if you get the chance to add your program name, your cohort in the chat, we'll try to recognize you because you're what makes everything happen. Oh, okay. Well, with this, I'd like to turn it back over to Deborah.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we want to get to know a little bit more about you, the community readiness, and it's really good. One of the reasons why we ask what cohort you're at and you're from and what grant program you're from is it really kind of helps us understand a little bit more about you, because I think the community readiness model has been around for a while. And we want to know, what is the best lesson that you've learned about the CRM? And I think many of you have already done your CRM, maybe with your first grant, go around, maybe you're in the process of doing that now, or maybe you just finished it, and so far, if you've been using the CRM, how has that made your program better? What is the added value of the CRM to your program? So again, take a moment to answer in the chat box. We really want to hear from you about the CRM, because that really helps us GTAs to really know how to provide TA, back to you. So again, what is the best lesson that you could share about the CRM? How has it impacted you and your community? Has it made your program better? Because to do the CRM process, it does take some time, that is, for many of us, it could take a couple of months to do that. And so you really learn a lot about your community and your stakeholders when you do the CRM. So again, I'd really like to hear from some of you in the chat box, or I would really invite you also to unmute yourself if you'd like to, say a few words. This is an interactive webinar, and we'd really like to hear from you. Okay. I think with all of the, I have about 17 grantees that I'm working with, and each one of them have done the CRM. And I know that once we get through the TA, really understanding what the CRM is, once it's implemented in the strategic action plan, I think everything that I've ever heard back about the CRM has been really positive. It really does help you fine tune your program to really making sure that your activities are right in line with your scores. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay. And again, the CRM is a learning process. Well, I know when I was first learning the CRM, it took me quite a while to really understand it. So have you been part of a previous team that has used the CRM? I think we have several grantee teams on here today that have had, maybe they're in their second 5 years. What was your experience, with the first, CRMs that were in your first, cycle of grants? What is your comfort level in applying the CRM to your program? Has it helped you with your policies and procedures? Because the CRM is not just to, really determine your activity level, but once you really get into the CRM, you can really apply that to many different areas.
We have Erin Casham.
Okay.
She shared in the chat. She said the best lesson was the CRM helped open up conversations with the community that we don't usually get to have as a department. It also highlighted for us that some things we thought were being communicated within the community weren't necessarily getting the wide reach we thought ahead of time. CRM has made the program better in many ways. One is that we have been able to clearly see where the community is at within the different dimensions. We thought some areas would be a little higher than they were, where we were surprised other scores were as high as they were. Good observations. Excellent sharing, Erin.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you've made some really good points there about how it really does open up, you really do get to know more about your community, historical trauma and how that has impacted, your people. Thank you for responding in the chat. Could we go on to the next slide? And I think I will turn this back over to Julie.
Okay, great. What we have here, we have the Community Readiness Manual. So our Community Readiness Manual, I wanted to point out that this is available in the Native Connections Resource Center, the NCRC, and that's a good resource for a lot of information for grantees. But this particular Community Readiness Manual is, well, there are a few versions in the NCRC, and what you want to do is to make sure that you've got the correct manual, and it'll say, you'll see the date, it says revised October 2020, and that's the correct manual. That's the one that you want to use, because some of the earlier editions, they may have different information, so it may affect a little bit of the way that it's administered. So I just want to point that out, that this is the one that you're going to want to have. And I'd like to ask if we could get one uploaded in the chat. We'd like you to have this Community Readiness manual. And so if we can upload it in the chat, then you can download it and save it to your computer so that you've got it. And it'll be helpful for the rest of the presentation also. And then I think what I'd like to do, as soon as we get that uploaded in the chat. Oh, Mark, I think Mark shared the file. Awesome. Okay, so what I'd like to do then is to turn it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. So I always call it the blue document, not the orange document. So we're going to be talking about the community readiness model, and we just back up. We're going to take a deep dive on the community readiness model. It's gathering local data to inform important community issues. We're talking today about tuning into the community's readiness to change. And sometimes you may want to just go on down the road with the program. You've got your ideas. You want to get that strategic action plan created. But the community readiness model reminds us that you can't move forward without that data from local people. And once you get that data from local people, it will help guide your development of goals and objectives and activities for the Native Connections program. So it's very helpful. Today, we're going to take a deep dive and give you an overview of the model. We're going to share with you the different dimensions of community readiness. And within that, we'll go deeper into the stages of readiness. And then we'll round out our presentation with Deborah Bratler, giving you some ideas on developing strategies based on and calibrated, tuned in, tapped in, turned on to each one of the dimensions and stages of readiness. So get ready. It's going to be kind of fun, I hope. Here's our overview. So what is a CRM? Well, as you may have noticed, it is a model for community mobilization and change that includes 9 stages of readiness that measure 6 dimensions or aspects of a community. Within this, each dimension has a stage of readiness, 1 through 9, and each readiness stage has specific interventions that work most effectively for that stage, and that's what Deborah's going to talk about, the strategies. The CRM also does not forget to integrate culture into the prevention process. In this image, you'll see how we've kind of shown how the stages of readiness wrap in together with the dimensions of change. So the 6 dimensions and 9 stages of readiness combine to address issues like suicide prevention. Using it, communities can write goals and objectives that match the community's level of readiness. And each goal can address multiple dimensions. I'll turn this over to Julie now to tell you about the purpose of community readiness. Julie?
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. The purpose of the community readiness, we did talk a little bit about what it's intended to do, but really it's putting the tools that you can measure readiness, putting those tools in your hands, and it's backed by research. And it gives you the opportunity to match your interventions to the community's level of readiness. And so when we think about it, it gives us the opportunity to make those first steps that we're doing in that direction to pay off, because it can be take time and effort away if it's not going in the right direction. And then the next one, please. So here we talk about why use the CRM. The CRM, it makes sure that you're aiming at the target of where your community actually is, so that you can spur your community into the action that they are ready for. It helps to the community to feel ownership. It's an inexpensive process. It's efficient because it says you only need to do 8 interviews. It makes sure that you integrate the community's vision. It also addresses resistance or barriers. So it gives us the opportunity to be able to get a good read on where the community is. So the next slide, please. Now, what the model can't do. CRM is a great tool, but it's a tool. It's not able to do everything for us. So it won't be able to tell you exactly what efforts you should do for your goals and objectives. It can't make people cooperate to support your program, but it does provide you with a lot of opportunities for what you can do to design and make the activities meet where your community is. All right, let me hand this back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Julie. So as we mentioned earlier, there are 6 dimensions of community readiness. Let me give you an example of community efforts. If you have a score of if you're at stage 1 for community efforts, it might look like that your community has no awareness of the need or efforts to address suicide prevention. If you've made it to stage 2, up a little bit from 1, you might notice that there are no efforts addressing, or that your community sees that there are no efforts addressing suicide prevention. If you're at stage 3, the community or just a few individuals within the community recognize the need to initiate some type of effort, but collectively there's no immediate motivation to do anything about it. At, I'd say, the sweet level of pre-planning, stage 4, some community members now have met and have begun a discussion of developing community efforts. And then stage 5 would be that efforts, programs, or activities are being planned, and so on. And there are 9 stages of readiness, starting with 1 of no awareness. No one has any awareness that suicide prevention or suicide is a problem. Stage 2, denial resistance. They may see it as an over there problem, or that doesn't happen here. Stage 3 would be vague awareness. This is where a lot of our grants are. Stages 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the most common scores that we see in our grantees currently in the very beginning. Pre-planning, stage 4, very popular. Stage 5, preparation. Stage 6, initiation. Stage 7, stabilization. Stage 8, confirmation and expansion. And ending out at stage 9, high level of community ownership. So the CRM pulls together and combines stages of readiness 1 through 9 for each of the 6 dimensions: community efforts, community climate, community knowledge of the efforts, community knowledge about the issue, leadership, and resources. And there's a process for using the CRM. First, you need to identify the issue, and we all know our issue is suicide prevention. Then you define your community. Where is the scope of the community? Where are the borders? Who are you serving? Then you conduct key respondent interviews, and I believe Julie said we're doing 8. Then you score to determine the readiness level of the community. When you have that score, you use that score to develop your strategies, your goals, objectives, and activities for your strategic action plan. And then you create community change. And then within 18 months to 2 years later, you do it again. You get your baseline data, and then you try to do it again to see if you've moved the needle towards change. And now I will turn this back to my colleague, Julie.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. No, we're looking at the dimensions of readiness. So what we have is, and it's been mentioned, and I know that we go over some of this material a couple times, but it gives us the opportunity to get familiar with it. So we have our dimensions. There's 6 factors. So we have our community efforts, community knowledge, leadership, community climate, community knowledge about the issue, and resources. So when we look at these 6 key factors or these dimensions, we look at our community efforts. So that shows where the priority of the issue is with the community and the efforts for prevention programming. Community knowledge is, what does the community know about the efforts? And we find these out through our interviews. And the leadership, it's the extent to which leadership makes it a priority of their priorities within the community. We have community climate. So what's the attitude of the community towards suicide prevention? And then community knowledge about the issue, important one. So what is it that the community knows about the problem, and how do they gain information when they are looking for information on suicide prevention? And then resources. What are the resources that support the efforts? And it may be knowledge about action plans that are taking place, any evaluation. So those are our dimensions of readiness, and there's 6 of those. Then we want to talk about the stages of readiness. So the next slide.
Julie, let me interject. This is Sarah.
Yes,
Real quick. I don't want people to think, I don't want them to feel overwhelmed. I know you're going to be scoring on all of these dimensions, but the way the CRM works, and they advise grantees to work with your 2 lowest scoring dimensions. So you don't have to do all 6 immediately in your first year or second year. You can focus on, each year you could focus on your lowest scoring dimensions. Like, for example, you might have leadership that's not very much involved, and so that might be a low score, and you'd want to increase that score. And you may want to also work on maybe the community climate. So just to let you know, to breathe a little sigh of relief, you don't have to do all 6 all at once. Back to you, Julie.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. Good points. Okay, so like we mentioned, there's those 6 factors, those 6 dimensions. Now we're talking about those stages of readiness, because within each of those, we're going to have stages that we're going to assess, and we're going to find out what those stages are. So we have that, of course, number one, when we're starting out, the no awareness. So it's a situation where most of us get started when we're learning about something, and our communities do. So those stages of awareness, no awareness, and denial and resistance. Many times this is when our programs are getting off the ground, when we're introducing suicide prevention activities into the community. So at the stage 2, there's some recognition, and there's may not be an awareness that something needs to be done, or they kind of throw up their hands and say, we can't do anything about it. So that's one of the beginning, when we're getting in the beginning stages. Then we have vague awareness, which is stage 3, and pre-planning. You know, with the grantees that I work with, many of the communities, they're in that stage 2 or stage 3. It's a common score, stage 2 or stage 3. And of course, we all like to see higher scores, but it's important to know where the community is. And when the community is getting started in suicide prevention efforts, many times it's in one of the lower scores. So we want to focus on the community and where they are today, and to be able to look at where our community is. With one of the communities that I've worked with before, they have been in on stage 3 or stage 4, and I think one of the things that they were activities that they were doing was in stage 3 or 4, like a suicide awareness walk was one of them, of trying to give education and do some wellness activities. Where there's some other ideas, maybe some of my coworkers can also help. Pre-planning, I think one of the communities did a youth mental health first aid training to provide that. So it's beginning to acknowledge the necessity of addressing the problem.
You know, Julie, I just wanted to have one thing to add in there. You know, we talk about scores, and I think in our culture today, you know, a higher score is a better score. But you know what, community readiness scores, all of these scores are good scores, whether it's, you know, from 1 no awareness all the way up to 9. These are all good scores. We're trying to help you identify where your community is at, you know, and so, you know, might be in the same state with, you know, some other grantees, and all the scores could be totally different, which is what we see all the time. So, you know, don't think that you have to get the highest score possible when you first do this. We're just looking at a place to start. And so all these scores are good scores.
Deborah, this is Sarah. I wanted to add also, the score is not your personal score, it's the community score.
Yes.
The community is. Your job is to raise that score. So if the community scores at a 2, you actually hope that unfortunately, if they score low, it's going to be up to you to raise it. So your job is to raise that score from maybe a 2 to a 3 over the course of a year or 2 years. So if you see that if you try to raise those scores to up higher beyond where they really are, it's going to make your job a lot harder.
Yeah, that's great.
Right, good points. Appreciate that. Let's take a look at the next one. No, and when we do these scores, many times the communities, well, when we have a Native Connections grant, as we get into these higher numbers, number 5, preparation, or 6, initiation, many times those programs are in their second round of grant funding. They may have started with the 1 or a 2, and they have progressed through their grant as they've assessed their community readiness and moved higher. So that's these higher scores, I think, that we see may be related to ongoing efforts to address the community readiness and the prevention efforts. So in stage 5, preparation, you know, I think we've got a lot of our staff people that when we talk to them, they may be in this stage of preparation. They may be looking at planning and implementing activities. Number 6, initiation. So activity and action is underway, staff being trained. There's some enthusiasm in the leaders because they haven't, you know, seen too many of the limitations yet. But the attitude in community members, there's modest support. There's becoming more modest support. So these give us the opportunity to move up, and let's look at some higher numbers. Number 7, stabilization. So there are efforts that are running, supported by decision makers, stable programs. I think when I looked at the manual, which we have our community readiness manual, you can look at some of these too, because it's in there, that those programs have been running for 4 years. I believe that's the benchmark for achieving a number 7. So that's one of the timeframes. Number 8, confirmation. So increasing knowledge, there's still support. The efforts are in place, and leadership supports expanding services. So leadership is recognizing that they're making a difference and wanting to see more happening. And new efforts are being sought to serve more groups. So expanding the efforts and the programs across more groups. And then 9, high level of community ownership. And that is, of course, it is the highest level, but it's where, you know, we have a lot of activities that are happening. Staff is trained, cross-trained, leadership and community involvement is high. Evaluation is taking place and being implemented. And we want to maintain your activities moving forward. So we see where the community is really supporting the program and holds efforts accountable to their needs. That's just a brief overview of our stages of readiness. So let me pass this over to Deborah.
Okay. Thank you. So I think what we want to talk about a little bit now is just, you know, you've spent all this time, you know, really learning the community readiness process. You've interviewed, you know, you've gone through that scoring process. You know what an anchored rating scale is, and you know how to use that. So now you have your scores. And I have to tell you that, you know, it's not unusual for you to have different scores in all of these strategies. I mean, in each of these 6 areas. You know, it's some grantees have a different score in each one. Some have maybe 2s all the way across. Whatever the scores are, again, just remember, this is a place to start. And so when you're looking at developing your strategies, this means that you're ready to start working on your strategic action plan. Our part 3 webinar will be looking at this more in depth, but right now we're just going to give you a quick overview of what these are. Next slide, please. So when you have a score of 1, this is a good place to start. You know, your goal here is going to be to raise awareness that this is happening in your community. That's all you're trying to do, is to raise that awareness. You know, and I always look at this, I really like the second bullet, visit with them one-on-one. And, you know, visiting with people, talking to them, having a cup of coffee with them, that is a strategy that you can add into your community, your strategic action plan if you have a score of 1. I've known grantees that have made a concentrated plan to go out and speak to as many people as they can one-on-one in their community. And that is a strategy that works, to talk to people. The Indian grapevine, oh my gosh, that gets through, you know, word of mouth is faster than Facebook, faster than social media. It's amazing how fast word gets out in the community. Take advantage of that and put good information out there about what you're doing. Next slide. You know, I think score of 2, we see a lot of, you know, 2s. And, you know, again, your goal is to raise awareness that this issue exists. Suicide exists in the community. You know, substance abuse is happening. You know, so you want to raise an issue that you can do something about this. I think one of the first strategies everybody does is you create a brochure, you create a flyer, you create some kind of information about what's happening in your community, and you're starting to distribute these throughout your community. Those are all good strategies that you can do under Native Connections. It might seem pretty low key, but this works. It helps to get that awareness out there that something is happening. Next slide. Vague awareness, again, we see a lot of 3s. You know, so your goal is to, you know, really raise awareness that the community can make a positive change. You want to keep that positive voice moving forward. You know, you're going to continue with the strategy that you did under a 1 and a 2, but now you're going to start, maybe you're going to start attending more tabling events, you know, health fairs, potlucks, your tribal holidays. You know, we're having a lot of Christmas is coming up. If there's any kind of arts and crafts or, you know, tabling events that you can put your brochures on, give them out. You know, you want to start focusing on topics that the community may be more ready to relate to. So again, you know, we see a lot of Facebook posts, a lot of social media posts under score 3 when you're trying to raise that awareness level. Next slide. You know, pre-planning. Again, you all have a community advisory board or a youth board or some kind of group that's helping you, you know, move your grant forward. Again, this is where you want to get those people involved in helping spread the word. You know, your local data, you know, in all of your grant applications, I know you have some pretty solid data that you put into your grant applications that help you get this grant. Break that down into common language, put it into some of your brochures, your information, distribute that in your community, you know, have people on, you know, give them information that pertains to them. Maybe you're going to start doing surveys, you know, after all of your activities that you do. Satisfaction surveys, you know, your GTA can help you develop surveys. They can help you develop polls, you know, just like what we do here in these webinars. So those are all really good strategies. You know, you're going to start identifying best practices. Maybe you're going to determine, you know, what evidence-based programs you want to use. What is your community ready for? QPR, which really seems to work with a score of 1 and 2, all the way up to more sophisticated, you know, mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid. So you're really looking at those. A score of 5, you know, preparation. This is where you're really going to start gathering, you know, more information to share out into your community. Next slide, please. Initiation. You're providing your community with specific information. This is where you're really starting to zero in on where your community's at and how you can really continually move this information forward. Next slide. Stabilization. You know, these higher scores are the ones that we're seeing more often in grantees that have their second round of Native Connections funding. Also, we're seeing these a lot in the 5th year of these grant cycles. So again, these are scores that you're going to be striving for and continually reaching for, and you will get there. Next slide. You know, a score of 8, you know, this is where you're really getting into a formalized, maybe MOUs. You're working with other community organizations on your policies and procedures if you need to do those MOUs or MOAs. Maybe you've got a local research directory that you're contributing to that's becoming, you know, you're really fine tuning those. A speakers bureau, really seeking out those events to where you can get on their agendas and really spread the word about what you're doing. Evaluation is very important in this part too, because this is where you're going to be looking at your outcomes and outputs and how you can use these scores to move this information forward, to really fine tune that data collection process. And then a high level of ownership. You know, your grantees, you are going to get there. So this is where you know, and again, this is a process. It's growth. You're going to see this over a period of time from your 1st year to your 5th year. So don't get discouraged if you don't get to a 9, you know, by the end of your 5th year, but you're probably well on your way to getting there. So I think at this time, I'm going to turn this back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Deborah. So we covered a lot of ground, and because I'm a visual person, I try to get that ground into one document here. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. You're looking at your 6 dimensions and you're scoring each of these dimensions within one of the 1 to 9 scores. That's a lot of information. That's a lot of data, and it adds up to action in the work that you do. For community efforts, you would increase local efforts, your programs and policies that address suicide prevention. In dimension B, community knowledge of the efforts, you would increase community members' knowledge about local efforts and their effectiveness and the efforts' accessibility to all segments of the community. far and wide. For Dimension C, leadership, you would raise awareness among appointed leaders and influential community members to be supportive of suicide prevention. In Dimension D, community climate, that's one of my favorites. You would raise awareness of suicide and suicide prevention so that the prevailing attitude is improved and of the community towards suicide prevention is empowered. In Dimension E, community knowledge about the issue, you would increase the number of community members who know about or have access to information on suicide prevention and how it impacts youth. And for F, resources related to the issue, you would increase access to or the number of local resources like people, time, money, space, and more that's available to support your suicide awareness and prevention efforts. So again, we've covered a lot of ground. You've got your GTAs here to help you with this work. I'm going to turn this back to my colleagues to bring us on home.
Okay.
All right. Okay, I think we'll go back over to the slide deck. Great. Okay. You know, we're open for questions now. We've covered a lot of information, and sometimes it's challenging to absorb it all or to think of questions, but you know, maybe for those that have worked on CRM, what has come up when you worked on your community readiness assessment? You know, were there barriers that you ran into? Did you come up with some ideas on how to get through those barriers? Ideas of who can help you in your community? We do have a lot of resources available, and we shared the manual in the chat. Everybody got the manual? But yeah, what kind of questions do you have about the community readiness model?
Julie, I have a question. If you're a large community, say like it may be as big as Cherokee Nation, which is pretty good size, goes across a number of different counties in the state, and you have a lot of different communities. Do you need to do more than one CRM?
Oh, that's a good question. Do we have some folks on that are that have a really large area that the program covers, big counties?
You know, that's a really good question. You know, one of the things that I've seen with some of my grantees, excuse me, when I was working with some of the Alaskan corporations that have, oh man, 20, 30 villages, you know, within their corporation, I've seen them, because our Native Connections programs are pretty small, you know, there's usually 1 or 2 person programs, that the corporation would, you know, the director of that Native Connections program at that corporation would be very strategic in determining which 1 or 2 communities to start with. And again, because you do have a 5-year grant, some grantees, I have seen them do 2 or more CRMs, you know, to really fine tune their activities for each of their communities. We have, in the lower 48, we have a lot of consortiums or confederate, you know, like a confederacy, I mean, a lot of tribal groups that have several tribes within them. And so I've seen that, like, for example, Wabanaki was one of our cohort 2 grantees. But they had 6 tribes under them. And so they really made an effort to do CRMs in 5 of their tribes in the first 6 months, because it was very important to them to fine tune that strategic action plan to each of those, you know, communities within their consortium. So I think if you can work with your GTA, if you do decide that you do want to do more than 1 CRM, if you want to do a CRM for 2 or 3, you know, of your communities, you know, work with your grantee technical assistants, because that we can help you do that. And that's where you can really fine tune those parts of those strategic action plans for those specific communities. It can be done.
Deborah, here's another question. What if I'm super busy, and I know a lot of people are, And I'm just one person, maybe two people in my Native Connections program. And I work just down the hall from another group of behavioral health staff. That can't I just reach out to them? They represent the community. They're all over the community. They know our people. Can't I just work with some of my colleagues and get this community readiness done quickly so we can get moving with a strategic action plan?
Wow, I guess what I would say is don't cut corners. It's really important, that you involve community members in the CRM process. Everybody here on this webinar today, all of us, we are all going to have a high level of readiness because we want to do something. We've educated ourselves about these issues. We know something needs to be done, but going into that community, think about, interviewing someone from 18 to 24, part of our population. I've had some grantees that have worked with parent groups to do CRMs for just specific high schools in their communities or on their reservations. So again, I would really caution you to not do too many professional people, because the community that we're working with are those parents, those grandparents, those elders, those youth. So that's the readiness you want to really look at, is what is their readiness, not necessarily your program director's readiness or, professional people that are in these fields. I realize that there are a lot of professions where this is all going to be new to them. So really, again, be strategic and have that discussion with your GTA about who to interview. That's what we're here to do, is to help you troubleshoot and really decide, help you make that decision. So
How
that
about
would be my
Deborah?
answer.
Deborah, one more time, another crazy question from Sarah. People in recovery, is it okay to ask them to take the interview?
Definitely, because you want to know what they don't know. You're there to raise awareness. And if you don't speak to people in recovery, you're not going to really get a good idea of how to work with that population, how to raise awareness with them, or how to provide activities at their readiness level, not your readiness level, their readiness level. So again, I'm always saying, look out into your community and who you wrote this grant for. Those are the people that you want to interview to get their readiness levels.
Thank you.
What I like about this community readiness model and the assessment process is that, there's a saying, we want, as our community wants things about us, but not without us. So to make sure that we're integrating the communities, those that are going to be involved in suicide prevention, to be part of this. So we make sure that they're well represented when we do the interviews, integrated into our activities. That's going to make a difference when we do talk about the community buy-in.
I like the fact that, Julie, it's local people collecting local data. And it's relevant data and it's current data. That's so important.
And this is data that stays in the community. It's not out, in the world, but it's for your community to use, and doing the community readiness. Many times I've seen grantees do a minimum of 2 of these, one in the first year and maybe one again in the 5th year. We also have grantees that do these every single year, and they really look at, they really do make an effort to adjust their strategic action plan. They time this to do their CRM, and then they update their strategic action plan for the following year. Usually I see that happening, in the late spring, early summer, or, when you're the 3 months before your fiscal year, is coming to a conclusion. And because, with all the grantees that we're working with, we have, different fiscal years here. We have the September to September, April to April, July to July. So again, start looking at, maybe doing another CRM 4 months before you're ready to update your SAP for the following fiscal year. So again, I always come back to the GTAs. We do keep track of these different milestones for your grant, you know, when your annual reports are due, your quarterly reports. And so, you know, we can give you a reminder, hey, remember you talked about, you know, you wanted to think about doing another CRM. And again, don't rush this process. This is not something you're going to do in 2 weeks. This is a process that could take you up to 3 months to do, because a lot of people want to be very, you know, really strategic about who they interview, you know, and take the time to work with your GTA to be trained on doing the CRM. When I was learning how to score these CRM interviews and really understanding that anchored rating scale, I was so confused on that. I tell you that it took me a couple of months to really understand how to score these interviews using that anchored rating scale. I could not get it at first. And then, gee, I guess after looking at it so much, it just seemed to click, and I, you know, and then I understood it. But one of the things about your GTA is we, you know, some of us have worked with CRM for so long. I can look at a set of scores and I can see if they've been averaged. You don't average your scores. There's no averaging here. And I can look at a set of scores and I can see if that's happened. And your GTA is available to help you score or to check that scoring, because it looks simple, but it's actually, it can be pretty complicated sometimes. So again, I would really just encourage you to work with your GTA. Take your time and really get to understand this, because this makes a huge difference in the successful implementation of your strategic action plan. Really, really a key piece of your whole program.
Well, I just wanted to mention too that Bobby uploaded a document there. The let's see, which one? Oh, you uploaded the CRM manual. There was one aligning local evaluation strategies I was looking for. But there's the CRM manual. So please make sure that you take that CRM manual, download it, and keep it, because it's going to be your guide being able to go through the process. And there's been some good hints for doing the CRM. And so what I'd like to encourage you is to reach out for resources. GTAs are your resources. We've got the NCRC, the Native Connections Resource Center, that has a lot of this information, fact sheet, guides, there's videos. That's what I learned when I learned how to score. There was a good video that the developers, Pamela and Barbara, that they went through the process of how to score. And that's how I finally got it. And it makes sense once you get into it.
We might turn them all into research geeks, who knows? It's good to have your hand on the finger of the pulse of where the hearts and the minds of the people are. Because when you know that, you can move forward feeling confident. That's what you're doing, what you're creating, what you're planning is doing it at the right time, at the right frequency, like tuning into a radio station. You tuned into the community with the scores, and you're ready to go and move forward. You know, you're doing the right thing. Any other questions? Anybody have questions?
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
I do have, the documents I put in there are, one of the documents was the ideas for mobilizing change with the CRM. And also the document that Julie was talking about, aligning the evaluation in the CRM. So that I included those.
Thank you, Bobby. The ideas for mobilizing change is a little bit of a bootleg copy. That's an internal document. It's still going through formalization, but I think it would really help people understand the calibration and how these scores can help calibrate goals and objectives to help move forward and get you ready to find the meaning and purpose behind doing the CRM, so you're ready for your SAP and your SAP implementation. Thanks, Bobby.
All right, thank you very much. Well, let's take a look at what we've got coming up. We've got some upcoming webinars. And this is part of the 4-part series that we mentioned, part of the Native Connections approach. So we've got part 3, Roadmap to Success, and that's about your strategic action plan. And that's going to be December 27th at 2:00 Eastern. And then part 4, Stay on the Path, that's about implementing your strategic action plan. And that one is January 17th. at 2 p.m. 2023. So these are upcoming events. And so make sure that you take a note of those. It'll be in the weekly digest, because the weekly digest is going to have all of your information of what's coming up and what you can join in for webinars. Okay.
Sorry, guys, I just want to say this is Chris Delgado with Coconut Tribal Council up here in Anchorage, Alaska. I know we're fairly new to the Native Connections grant, but I just want to say a big shout out and a big thank you to Bobby. We had a meeting with her recently and it went really well, and I'm excited to see what we can do. And like I said, I downloaded the stuff right now. I'll start doing the community readiness model, see where we're at. But yeah, we have a lot of things here that are pretty structured. So if any other grantees need any help or anything, I don't want to toot our own horn over here, but we have a pretty thing going. We have a monthly cultural activities. We have monthly assist training, monthly safe talk. We're going to start doing key PR in the school districts here pretty soon. We're already doing in-depth and not trainings and whole bunch of other cool stuff. So we're pretty lucky up here in Alaska. I feel lucky to have Bobby as our technical assistant. And if you guys need anything else, by all means, Crystal and I and our prevention team can do what we can to help out other grantees. So a big thank you. I know I came on late. Technical difficulties up here in Alaska, but what do you expect? So so I just want to say a big shout out and a big thank you to all the hard work you guys are doing.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank
Yes, we
you.
think Bobby's pretty special too.
Yes.
All right, so let's see. Now as I think we're just ready to wrap up.
Thank you.
Next slide.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you for
This is-
joining us today.
Yes,
Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, Miigwech. I always like this one because it's got our thank yous in all of our different languages, many of them. So we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar so that we can move forward in our Native Connections approach.